when we were putting this Dark Sky Festival together, we wanted things that were inspirational, some of the artwork. We wanted things that were educational, like the UMD Planetarium and Bob King's program at the Pavilion on Sunday night. But we also wanted to make sure that when people got inspired and learned about the sky, they could take that next step. And the next step is, okay, what can I do about it? In my home, in my business, in my community, how do I help one light bulb at a time? And that's where Scott Lind comes in. Scott is a consulting electrical engineer with Mead and Hunt in Middleton, Wisconsin, where he focuses on designing sustainable and reliable electrical systems. As the lights go on.
More reliable than this one.
Thanks, Julie.
That was perfect timing, I thought. That was ideal, yeah.
With more than 35 years experience, Scott is passionate about designing outdoor lighting that respects all of the species that we share the planet with. So Scott is one of those hands-on people. He came to Bayfield braving the snow from like dog sled up from southern Wisconsin. And the first thing he does is to go out on the old iron bridge with Bill Plant to check out the lighting. And then after that, he's going up to Mount Ashwell to check out the lighting up there. So Scott really wants to help us change this place one day, one light bulb at a time. So to get us started and to give us a little bit of homework, things we can do in our own homes, our own businesses, and our own communities, here is Scott Lind.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I am happy to be here and share some action items you can take. This graphic you see up on the screen, the Kickapoo Valley Dark Sky Initiative. I'm the president of that 501c3 located in the Kickapoo River Valley. And our entire focus is taking action. That's what we're about, because we know that education is important. We know inspiration is important. But how do you turn that into changes is what we're really all about. So that's what this talk is about today. Let me ask first, I usually know my audience a little better than I know this audience. Is there anybody in the room who's an electrician? Okay, I'm off the hook because on many things, but this presentation will be approved for electricians, I anticipate. There's a new version of one I did last year for continuing education credit. So forgive me if this is too technical. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end, and I'll flip through some things that I think might be more technical than what you want. But the purpose of having a presentation like this is to get the information in the hands of people that are licensed to install light fixtures. The people that are, generally speaking, purchasing a lot of light fixtures or making recommendations to you as an end user what you should buy. So the goal is to get that kind of information in the hands of people that really have maybe a broader impact on the market in general. So forgive me if it's more technical than you're expecting, and we can answer any questions you have at the end or any time in between. So here's an example of what not to do. I use it as a poster child for everything done wrong. These are 5,000 Kelvin fixtures. They're obviously too bright, you can tell that. They actually, if you bought them, would be listed as a full cutoff fixture. And we'll talk about what full cutoff means later, but they're adjustable. An electrician tipped them up about 30 degrees when he installed them, thinking that was gonna help light the edge of the parking lot better. And that's the result right there. We've subsequently convinced this store to tip those fixtures down. I've actually done some of that myself for them. I'm still working on getting other changes made, but the first step was to tip them down. And that makes a huge impact on SkyGlow just by doing that. So here's an example installation of in Ontario, Wisconsin that I did. And I'll ask you to guess, what do you think the color temperature of the lower fixtures are? Anybody want to hazard a guess what color you think that light is?
Orange.
Orange. So that lower light level, the lower light picture is 1800 Kelvin. So the upper picture is high pressure sodium, two fixtures of high pressure sodium on the left and right. And the middle fixture is a 5,000 Kelvin LED. And we'll talk more in detail about this installation later on. But there's lots of negative consequences, obviously, to having artificial light at night that's unnecessary. And clearly wasted energy is part of that problem. Poor uniformity and glare is a problem. Security, we'll talk about why having excess lighting is actually a detriment to security as opposed to an enhancement to security. So we'll get into all that. I'm going to try and turn this a little bit so I can see if this works better. Can you hear me okay through that? All right. So here's an image you may have seen before that shows why excess light is not always a good thing. It usually is a bad thing. The gentleman that's at the gate in the right-hand picture is also at the gate in the left picture. It's just that the camera was overwhelmed by the light coming into the lens, and the same is true for our eyes. If you've been standing there, you just can't see him because of that huge contrast. So we improved that lighting by getting rid of the glare to help with that. So here's another consequence of bad lighting, which is increased sky glow. This image is from a study that we'll talk about later in Chelan County, Washington, where they changed out high-pressure sodium fixtures to LED street lighting, and what that did to sky glow from an adjacent national park. Another consequence of bad lighting, and if you saw these images from 2 years ago from McCormick Place in Chicago, because they've got nothing but glass on the outside of that building, there was a storm that brought an extraordinarily high number of birds into the city that night and killed all these birds just at McCormick Place in one night. Now, the good news about this image is, as tragic as that was, is as a result of that and the press coverage that came out of it, McCormick Place has put Fritz on 1 million square feet of glass. And that, combined with some control of indoor lighting at night, either through shades or through dimming, has reduced the bird collisions at McCormick Place to not zero, but essentially zero compared to what had happened in the past year. So it's a good news story at the end. Yeah.
What is Fritz?
Fritz are like dots that you put in your glass. You can retrofit your glass with. So now we're at the human impacts, right? And the studies that show this, and many of you may be familiar with these already, but the number of studies that show negative human impacts from artificial light at night just continue to pile up. A study in the UK that was published, I think, in 2024, talked about your increased risk of mortality when you're exposed to artificial light at night, when they put light monitors on 88,000 people and monitored their exposure to light in daytime and at night, and then came back years later and tracked their health outcomes and adjusting for social things and other impacts you can have on your health. Obviously, there's lots of them. But adjusting for those things, they had much higher mortality rates of people that were exposed to artificial light at night. And surprisingly, they had higher mortality rates than folks that were exposed to too little natural full spectrum light during the day. So the impacts were much higher at night during the day, but really the takeaway is that light impacts our bodies and our health in ways that we really don't fully understand yet and don't appreciate. So, but artificial light at night is a huge problem on human health. So we got a few definitions. Bug ratings are something you may or may not have ever heard of before. It stands for backlight, uplight, and glare. And so in this image, the yellow is the backlight. So if you picture a street light, that's the light is facing towards the street, trying to light the street. Backlight is the light that's coming towards the sidewalk. That's backlight. Uplight is obvious. The blue section's uplight, anything going above 90 degrees. And then the forward light is the light that contributes most to glare. So that's really kind of part of the glare rating. Although high angle light that's going any direction from the fixture, including back toward the sidewalk, also is factored into the glare rating. But these are ratings that help you define how a fixture performs. When you're looking to buy a fixture, if you're technically able to understand what a bug rating is, that'll help you understand what that light's kind of look like in terms of how much glare you're going to get, how much is going to go to the sky, and how much light you're going to get behind the fixture, either shining on the wall or going back towards the sidewalk or a lawn, for example. So a couple other definitions. Lumens. Most of us in this room have always thought about the amount of light in terms of watts, right? We know what a 60-watt light bulb looks like. I'm sure everybody in this room knows what a 60-watt light bulb looks like. If I told you, a 900 lumen light bulb, does that mean anything to anybody? Really, no, right? Unfortunately, the facts are that because LEDs are so much more efficient than incandescent 60-watt lamp was, and because LEDs have continued to improve in efficiency, although it's starting to flatline now, but for years and years and years, the efficacy kept going up, and I've got a slide for that later to show you that. We really have to learn lumens. We really do. If you think in terms of watts, you won't understand what a fixture is going to do for you. You have to start thinking in lumens. So what I would suggest you do is go out and buy a light bulb, put it in your lamp at home, and see how many lumens that is. Maybe buy 2 light bulbs at different lumen levels, and just start to get a sense in your own mind what 900 lumens looks like versus 400 lumens, for example. That'll help you when you're shopping to understand what you're going to get when you buy it. Correlated color temperature, again, is another term you probably aren't familiar with, but if you've seen light bulb boxes that have a 4-digit number followed by a K, that's the correlated color temperature, and it's defined as kelvins, and that sounds counterintuitive, but kelvins is because that's the color temperature of that light is compared to the color of tungsten when it incandesces at different temperatures. So as you raise the temperature of that metal, it gets more blue, and that's why the higher CCT rating of a fixture is more blue. So we're looking for warmer looking light, but a lower number, right? I mentioned 1800 Kelvin earlier. That's effectively the lowest color temperature you're going to see in the United States right now. In fact, anywhere in the world right now is 1800 Kelvin that's defined as a standard. So warmer the better in terms of sky glow, in terms of less blue light we'll talk about. Overall, the impacts are much reduced if you use those warmer, lower color temperature numbers. And then the last thing here is color rendering index. Again, something you probably aren't familiar with, but if you think about the best analogy I can think of is you go into a clothing store and buy something that's red or blue or green under fluorescent lights, let's say as an example. And then you walked outside in the sunshine and looked at it and it looked different. That's why, because the color rendering index of that light source is not the same as sunlight. Sunlight's the gold standard, right? So we always rate our light fixture and our bulbs in terms of what the color rendering index is. How close to that perfection is it? Key thing to know about that is that is important to a point at night, but we don't need perfect color rendering at night to be able to maneuver and do the things we do at night compared to what we want to buy clothes to we're going to wear all day long or whatever. So CRI is important, but CRI of 70 and above is typically acceptable to specifiers like me. And as you add blue, you can get a higher CRI. So if you have somebody who specifies, I want an 80 CRI or a 90 CRI, and there are very limited applications for that, typically that adds more blue to the fixture. Not all the time, but you can still get very good color rendering even with these really warm color temperatures. So some myths, that brighter is always better. We talked about that already. That a higher color temperature is better. And then I mentioned security cameras in here twice. I've done some testing on security cameras, and the reason they're mentioned so frequently is in the work that I do as an engineer. Oftentimes, security consultants will ask for a very high color temperature because they think they need it to get their cameras to perform well. And so a partner and I, who's a security consultant, tested 7 different cameras a year ago at very low color temperatures, at very low light levels. And he's published a little bit of that already. We're going to publish more on that, but it really turns that notion on its head. In fact, the ideal color temperature might be 2700K for security cameras, but 1800K performs really, really well. They can adjust for that. And then again, the myth that a warmer color temperature has a lower CRI. That's also not true. So there's an example from our security camera testing of 1800 Kelvin on a color board. And the reason that's important is that if that were high pressure sodium, which you're going to see in the next slide, you'll see what that looks like compared to this, where you can make out the color even at 1800 Kelvin, which is the warmest you can buy. A couple slides down, sorry. So the reality of this is that uniformity is really critical, right? So much of the lighting you see outside at night is very non-uniform. You got a point source here that produces a lot of light and a lot of glare, and then nothing. And our eyes can't deal with that. Just like when you drive down the highway at night and you're facing those 5,500 Kelvin LED headlights that we all hate. I hear that at every presentation I do is, what about the headlights, right? Yeah. People are actually working on that. I'm not working. People are actually working on that. But that's exactly the same concept with outdoor lighting that we live with today. We have so many things that are just like a headlight looking at us and then nothing. So we can improve that. And that's what I've been able to do in the examples I'm showing you is take those glare bomb wall packs and turn them into zero up light fixtures, dim them down, change the color temperature so you get less glare, improve uniformity dramatically. And the examples I'm going to show you, I generally speaking have kept the light levels the same at the early adopter stage, because I wanted the public to understand that, yes, the color changed, right? But the light level is exactly the same. I didn't want to dim them to what the standards would call for, which I easily could have done, because I didn't want them to think that somehow that was related to the color. So you'll see examples in there, like the first one I showed, where, really, do we need it that bright? No, we don't. It was intentionally kept that bright, and yet still had 80% energy savings, 90% reduction in sky glow because of making changes to the fixtures, right? Talked about security cameras already, talked about glare and poor vision already. So here's that slide I promised you. So these are the tests I did in my backyard where we looked at different light color sources and how they perform with these color charts. You can see how the high pressure sodium, which has a CRI of 20, color rendering index of 20, does such a poor job. And that's what, the reason it's important for me to show this to electricians and to lighting professionals is that in our heads, we think that that gold colored light is going to produce color rendering like the high pressure sodium instead of the next slide over. And that's important from the standpoint of knowing which car is yours in a parking lot, right? But from a security perspective, you also want to know what color shirt was this guy wearing, that kind of thing. But then when you go up the color temperature scale, 2200 Kelvin, I've installed a lot of 2200 Kelvin on street lights, and then 2700K and up, you can see that there's not much to be gained in terms of color rendering when you get above 2200 Kelvin. The other number that's on these charts is the sky glow impact, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But all these comparisons that I'm showing here, so if high pressure sodium is our standard at 100, then an 1800K LED, this particular one at least, has 3% more sky glow, so it's 103. That's what that number means. 2200K has 72% more sky glow already, just going to 2200K. And this is all identical fixtures. Doesn't matter if they're a glare bomb, doesn't matter if they're a full cutoff, identical amounts of light coming out of the fixture. So we aren't changing the amount of light, we aren't changing how it's shielded. All we're doing is changing color, that's it. And that's how much sky glow impact difference there is as you go up in color temperature. So that's why when you see we get down to 4000 Kelvin, which is what the vast majority of outdoor lighting is, that's got 3 times the sky glow impact for an identical fixture, high pressure sodium, and nearly 3 times the impact of an 1800 Kelvin fixture. So it's super important and really poorly understood, even with lighting professionals, how much impact that has on sky glow. So here's an article talking about the increase in sky glow worldwide, roughly 10% a year over the past decade, year after year, so doubling about every 8 years. So it's been dramatically rising, and we see that in Wisconsin, and I'll show you a couple slides here that show you what's happening in the area where I live. So this should run for us as a graphic. There we go, 2016 to 2020, and now look the change when we get to 2022. So this will keep cycling through. The blue area there, kind of in the middle where it says Lafarge Vale, between Lafarge and Ontario, that's where we're looking to establish an international dark sky park. And we started that process in 2021. I changed out a bunch of light fixtures at the Wildcat Mountain State Park facilities and Kickapoo Valley Reserve facilities. We started educational outreach. Another fellow, John Heasley, was taking sky brightness measurements in the whole area and looking at how bright the sky was. And at the beginning, we easily qualified as a dark sky park. There was no problem. 30 months later, the sky brightness had gone up 57%. And it's like, how is this possible? I've been changing out fixtures in the places that are closest to the center of our park. How is this even possible? And I really thought John's numbers were wrong. I didn't trust his numbers. Turns out they were absolutely correct. And that's because, well, sorry, let me say this first. So the key thing about that slide is that that's satellite imagery, right? As bad as that looks, those satellites missed most of the change because they don't see the blue light that's put out. They weren't designed as light pollution monitoring satellites. They were designed for other purposes, but they're used for that purpose. Here's what it really looks like from the ground. So John's measurements in the Ontario area at the north end showed a 54% increase. At the south end, it was 67% increase. I mean, that's like 12 miles apart. How is that possible too? Why is that so different? But look at the satellite change, right? 12% and 8%. In fact, the magnitude is reversed, right? We measured higher ground change in the south, but a lower satellite change in the south. The backstory is that the streetlights in Ontario over that time period were changed out from high pressure sodium to 3000 Kelvin LEDs. It took me 2 years to convince the utility to change them to 3K instead of 4K, Alliant Energy, but they did. At the south end, there was a DOT roadway project, and so those were all put in at 4000 Kelvin. And a bunch of other adjacent side streets were also changed to 4000 Kelvin over the same time period. That's why it got so much brighter in the south than the north. That's why the satellites in the south, the view of the south from the satellites showed less increase because it had more blue in it, so all the blue disappeared, right? So again, that didn't make any sense to me. The things I've shared with you in terms of sky glow impact, I didn't know myself at that magnitude 3 years ago. But this study out of Chelan County, Washington, the county was going to change out all the roadway lighting in their county. They were changing it in a ratio of like 80% 3000 Kelvin, 20% 4000 Kelvin, because the streets on the non-state highways could be 3K, but the state highways, like in Wisconsin, had to be 4K. The county called them in, asking them to do this study because they thought the sky was going to get darker, just like I thought the sky was going to get darker. And the same exact thing happened. 60% brighter in an adjacent national park. And again, the satellites failed to detect it. So this is from that study. That's the image I showed you earlier before, the sky glow, and then the sky glow afterwards. And then the upward radiance in the upper corner, which is what the satellites pick up, actually looked better. So we're going to change gears a little bit now and get into how we can help fix that. So the Design Lights Consortium is a national organization that tests bulbs, tests fixtures, tests controls that are looking to qualify for energy rebates nationwide. They cover about 90% of the energy rebates programs in North America, US and Canada. They have something like 500,000 products in their database. So manufacturers submit them for testing, they have to pay for that work. And then organizations like Focus on Energy can use that testing to say, okay, you qualify for a rebate or you don't, right? So they've done a lot of great research. Leora Radetzky has partnered with me. I met her. That was the best thing that ever happened in terms of advocacy for this effort. And she's their senior lighting scientist. She and others have published a lot of great research on this topic, and that's one of the papers that she came up with. All right, one last definition. And my wife Marla, who's here, tells me this slide is too technical for most people, and it probably is. But this is really to show you what the spectral power distribution of LEDs looks like. So all those colors we showed you earlier, different colors of light, and how the distribution of spectrum from blue to red is across different ones. So you probably can't read that on the right-hand side at all. But essentially the curve, the spike at the left is blue. The short wavelength light is blue. And the hump at the right-hand side is closer to the red spectrum. And so the highest peak you'd see over here on the left-hand side would be a 5000 Kelvin LED. And the lowest peak you would see on this slide is, I believe, an 1800K LED. So you can see how much less blue there is, and that's where we get that sky glow impact. And then scotopic photopic ratio, and this again is more technical than we need today, so I won't go into details, but it really has to do how your eyes respond to light at different light levels, whether you're in the scotopic or photopic, and there's actually a mid-range there, but we won't go into that today. So I'm going to show you the same information in a couple different ways to try and drive it home, because again, even for me, 3 years ago, the importance of color temperature in sky glow was not well understood. And when I presented this information to professional lighting designers, when I presented to other electrical engineers, I've seen eyes literally get bigger, right? Because we just didn't know this information. And so that's why, in terms of education and advocacy, that's where I focus my efforts. But you can see the huge increases just based on color temperature. Again, a chart showing the same kind of detail, how much it increases. Different baselines, high pressure sodium, 1800K. In some of these presentations, I take high pressure sodium out entirely because we aren't installing, nobody that I know of is installing new high pressure sodium fixtures. We're all installing LEDs, and the warmest one available is 1800K. That's a newly available product. Within the last year, it's available. And then again, the same information, just in a different form, just to drive home how important color temperature is. So you may have seen some of these slides before as well, just the basic principles and how you get there. So as much as I've talked about color temperature, equally important, in some cases more important depending on what the fixture design is, shielding, right? Let's get the fixture so the light is going down, not up into the sky. In fact, let's do better than just down. Let's get some shields on it so it's cut off to a better angle so we don't have as much glare in our eyes, etc. We talked about color temperature a lot. Intensity is a huge thing. I mentioned earlier that the retrofits I started doing, the first ones I've been doing in areas, I kept the intensity the same. The subsequent ones I did, I've installed dimmers in all of them. The subsequent ones I did, I actually turned those dimmers down to the IES minimum standards, what the national standard is for lighting, to the minimum standards. And I told everybody that I installed them for, if you don't like it, come back to me and I'll come back for free and I'll get up on a ladder and I'll adjust it. Nobody has. Nobody has. The same is true of the fixtures I put up. They're adjustable in color temperature. I set them all at 1800 Kelvin except for the street lights. Even though they're adjustable to 2200 and 2700 K, I bought those fixtures, A, because they were available at low color temperature, and B, because I'm taking a risk. I'm putting these things up for customers. And I was afraid some of them would say, oh, that gold, nobody has. Every fixture I've installed that's adjustable is still at the minimum level and still at that warm color temperature. Universally true. But the intensity piece, the vast majority of outdoor lighting you're going to see is far higher in brightness than what the standard is. And so that's a huge deal. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? And then the last thing on this list is timing and controls. So, ideally a light fixture is off. Doesn't produce any sky glow. It doesn't use any energy. So the ideal thing is to turn things off. Obviously, if we don't need it, turn it off, and we don't need it. But quite honestly, what I'll tell you is that that's also one of the most expensive things to do in terms of payback. So when I do everything else correct, because we use so little energy in LEDs, when you add in the cost of the control to do that, right, that often has a negative impact on the payback, as counterintuitive as that might be. So controls are really important, and I think everybody should do controls, and the Energy Code mandates controls for commercial uses, so we have to have them to meet the commercial requirements. We'll talk about that later. But we need to do all the other things as well, because a lot of times those lights are left on, even when they don't need to be on. I'm not going to go into parking lots. This is really aimed at electricians. Yeah, sorry.
Talk about BADAP when your turns once off high,
Yep.
specifically street lights.
Yeah.
You're saying you put the controls on to do that, for there's no payback on it. And how possible putting the controls on versus the energy save?
For streetlights, I haven't done enough streetlight work with controls to answer that question. In terms of commercial lighting, the amount of watts you use, the amount of power you use over that 12-hour period on an average night, it's very low, right? If you're setting the light level correctly, it's pennies really. Unless it shines in your window, right? Exactly. So you're right, and that's the thing about it is that, and that's how we got to where we are today. Let me go back one. I'll leave it in this slide rather than the parking lot slide. That's really how we got to where we are today. Is because of the fact when LEDs came out, the entire focus was on energy savings, and the research didn't exist at that time. What's the impact of going to a bluer light source? Right? We had high pressure sodium for 50 years, and so as they were adopted for energy savings. We didn't really have warmer options available, right? 3000 K was about as warm as it got. But now we have these other impacts you're talking about, like shining in your window and affecting your health, right? So the HPS probably shining in your window as well. Most likely it wasn't as bright. It didn't have as much blue. So the circadian disruption was less, right? Even though it's still artificial light and that's bad, it was lower. But now the evidence is really piled up. So I expect, there are installations, in fact, as a sidebar, I'll just share with you, since this isn't a credit course, I can talk about what I want to. In France, there was a study just published in 2025, 15,000 municipalities in France, going back as far as 2014, and they were studied through 2024, turn off their streetlights in the middle of the night, from midnight to 5 or 6 in the morning. 19,000 decided to turn them off. 15,000 of them totally off, right? Not dimmed, totally off. They went back and looked at those communities in 2025 to see, have they changed that process at all? 131 of those 19,000 have decided to turn them back on again. That's 0.68%. So that tells you that your question about turning streetlights off or even dimming them, the other 4,000 dimmed them, but turning them off entirely is possible. And what the results of that study tell me, even though it's not a study per se, it's just an analysis of what they've done. If there were dramatically negative impacts to that community, higher crime, pedestrian accidents, car accidents, whatever, I have to believe that more than 0.68% would have them turn back on again. So I think that's really informative for us going forward about what we can do with our streetlights, and that's starting to happen. People are starting to dim streetlights at different hours of the day. All right, so again, aimed at electricians, but it'll probably be informative for you as well. Some example calculations. This is a community center building in Ontario. These are the glare-bound wall packs that the electrician put up. Even though I'd asked the community to use dark sky fixtures, even though they told them to use dark sky fixtures, this is what they got instead until about a year later when he finally came back and changed them. But this was the analysis I looked at, was this building. And so when I proposed to them that they use warmer colored zero uplight fixtures, these are the kind of results you can see. So sky glow decrease of 81%, energy savings going from 400 watts down to 264. But what does that do in terms of the lighting the parking lot itself, right? So the max to average, which is uniformity, that's really the criteria for parking lots now, is max to average. It used to be about 9-to-1 from max to average. With the dark sky fixtures, it goes to 4-to-1, so much more uniform, right? And where does the light end out in that parking lot? Because it's lit from the building, which generally speaking is a bad idea, but poles are very expensive, they're complicated to install. So I get why it happens, but it's really a bad idea trying to light a whole parking lot from a building. But that's what's there. So how much does that affect that? Well, it drops it by 2 feet, right? So not a huge impact on that. So you can see the uniformity increases. That average foot candle is still 8 times the standard, even at that other level. And again, in the idea of acceptance and having people understand that we're not trying to take away their light, I try to keep those light levels about what they were. But that's the only reason I do it. Otherwise, I would drop them all down to a lower level. And that RPL calculator that's referred to in the second line item is one that's the slide I skipped earlier. I'll just say very briefly, there's a study that was done on parking lots and people's perception of safety and their ability to see driving and walking as well. And so there's a whole calculator out there that tells designers what are the trade-offs for level of light, uniformity, and color of light, right? That's what that calculator refers to. So here's an example that I've used a lot, the Ontario Fire Station. I showed it earlier. Making that change, 75% reduction in energy, sky glow down by 92%. Can't quite read the right-hand side, but the uniformity improved by 35%. Again, maintain the average light level and the minimum light levels to exactly what they were before. But at some point in the near future, I plan to go back there and ask the village to, we'll turn those down. We'll dim those down to the standards, right? Because they're all dimmable. Every one of those fixtures is dimmable. This happens to be an image from Canada, an area around Sherbrooke, Canada. Mont Megantic was the first dark sky preserve in the world, and they have a lot of amber fixtures there. So not 1800 Kelvin, there is some 1800 Kelvin as well, but they have very narrow band amber fixtures. So they have essentially no color rendering, right? Less color rendering than high pressure sodium even, but that also has dramatically less sky glow. So one thing I'll mention is that, if you really want to just minimize sky glow and you care nothing about anything else, then direct emission amber is what you should use. Other than off, you should use direct emission amber. Unfortunately, direct emission amber also has much less efficiency than any of the broader spectrum LEDs do. So maybe half the efficacy, right? Half as efficient for the same amount of light. And then it has no color rendering. But places like Flagstaff, Arizona use direct emission amber. If you're near an observatory, you might choose to use direct emission amber, but just understand there's trade-offs to that. And since, from my perspective, what I'm trying to do is drive change at scale, I'm not thinking just about observatories. I'm also thinking about climate change impacts, and these fixtures that are on at night are almost universally powered by carbon-based sources, right? They aren't powered by solar. We aren't storing much power yet. I try and look at a balanced approach to doing that. So that's why I'm advocating for the warmest LEDs we can use that still have good efficacies, and I think are more likely to get widespread adoption. But if you want the best of the best and all you care about is sky glow, use direct emission amber. This slide talks about overlighting. And really it's just to show you in a very poor way, I guess, that the efficiency of a manufacturer's fixture changed 40% over a short time period. You can see on the right-hand side what the lumens, the increase in efficacy, and the 4000K is the most commonly used one. So I talk about that as being roughly 40% in many cases. But an electrician that I know went out to buy a replacement fixture for a parking lot, and he went to the manufacturer and he wanted the same model number. He brought the same model number and put it in the parking lot. And it's like, why is this fixture so much brighter? Well, there is a degradation over time to all sources, including LEDs. They do degrade over time. But with LEDs, it's pretty gradual. But the efficiency of that fixture had gone up by 40%. And so instead of, we buy these new fixtures, not like a one for one, just put one in a parking lot, but you buy a whole new parking lot and you say, well, I'll use the same fixture I used 4 years ago. You could get 40% more light out of that fixture. And you don't even know that, right? You aren't aware you're wasting that much energy. We aren't harvesting the possible energy savings, we're just adding more light to the environment. That's the point of that slide. So these again are aimed at electricians, but there's brand new standards just published this year, last year now. The key thing I'll mention to you in terms of parking lots is that left-hand standard, the RP8 standard, which covers parking lots and roadways. The parking lot standard changed so dramatically that the number they use for the minimum light level is now the average light level, which may not mean a lot to this room, but as a designer, what that means is they have no more minimum. They took away the minimum and took that same number and made it an average. And so for you as end users, if you're a commercial business owner or municipality and you're asking the designer to design a parking lot lighting system for you, if they aren't aware of that, and they just have a rule of thumb they use, what they're going to try and do is achieve the standard, if they think about it, try and achieve a standard at the darkest corner of the parking lot at the minimum level, and then base their lighting design on that minimum. Now you can use an average number. That's what the standard requires, and it works. I've done designs to this, and not worry about that one little speck of corner in the point of the parking lot having to be that minimum number. That has a huge impact on how much light you throw in that whole parking lot, right? And the complexity of doing it. And the standard on the right is the basically all other outdoor lighting standard, and it also had big changes in 2025. So the point is that if you're designing and you want to design to standards, which I think we all should, you'd be aware these standards dramatically changed in 2025. This slide is just talking about control requirements. They also changed in 2025. Previously, it was a 30% dimming level. Now it's 50% dimming level. Same thing presented a different way. A third big change is the Design Lights Consortium I mentioned earlier has a brand new standard out now, which will allow these warmer color temperature fixtures to qualify for incentives, for rebates. And that's a big deal. And the work I've been doing has been almost solely based on cost and savings. And now with these things being eligible for incentives, that'll just accelerate further. So it's all good news, all positive news. Design Lights Consortium, I serve in the Luna Advisory Group. So this is something that's sort of a parallel to Dark Sky International. But Luna stands for Light Utilization for Night Applications. And it essentially is a subcategory of approved fixtures that have to meet additional criteria to qualify for the Luna program to be more dark sky friendly. So for electricians or for anybody, let's install all the code required controls, first of all, at a minimum. And there are significant requirements for commercial buildings to do that. Only zero up light fixtures, that's obvious, right? Don't overlight. Let's get the uniformity figured out first, and then only put as much light as we need, because uniformity is really the key thing. Choose the warmer color temperature we talked about. 2700K is better than most, right, in terms of what you see out there now. It still has a lot of blue in it. You saw the percentages maybe earlier, and certainly nothing higher than 3000K, which is the highest you can go to qualify for Dark Sky International light fixtures. And then I'm asking electricians to really educate their peers about this as well and their customers so we can choose better options for outdoor lighting. Let me know if any questions you have any time. That QR code is for the 501c3. You can reach us that way. And we have a website that has a lot of information on it in terms of fixtures. The availability of these warmer fixtures is changing so rapidly the list of fixtures that's on that website is out of date almost on a monthly basis, right? So the opportunities are growing every month to do it differently and do it better. It just takes research. The owner of the bookstore, Julie, mentioned to me that when she went looking for fixtures for this building, she wanted dark sky fixtures, went to a big box store, and it's like, where are they? They aren't anywhere, right? And it takes a lot of digging, right? And it's still true in the residential market for sure. But in the commercial market, if you have people that are doing designs for you, make sure they're looking for these things because they're available now. Thank you very much.
Some experience that I had was working with big box stores, two particular. One was Walmart, one was Costco. They happen to be kind of in the same parking lot, surprisingly. But, and we worked with them to try to get dark sky lighting, downlighting. It was difficult because they had a cookie cutter approach to their buildings, number one, and then also their parking lot lighting. And even when we presented dark sky lighting and options for that, this was back in 2015, that they rejected it because of security. And it became an issue back and forth that it could be, yes, the security issue is there, but it also could be a light efficiency and what they're paying for those utilities to do that. We eventually talked them into it, but it took a couple of years to be able to do that and then get a design plan together for them to be able to look at. And their designers, architects agreed that it probably would be a good idea. So they did it. But that was again in 2015. Things have probably improved.
Yeah. You asked me to repeat the question briefly. So, the question really had to do with big box stores and parking lot lighting and the pushback you might get on wanting dark sky lighting and maybe lower light levels because of concerns the stores might have about security and their national standard practices, right? I'm glad you're able to get it improved. That's wonderful. And that kind of perseverance is really what it takes many times. And even the advocacy work that I do, when I reach out to public works directors or electricians, I'm used to not getting return phone calls. I'm used to them not being in the office when I stop by for months at a time. And what's been surprising to me and what I've learned over that time is that this is not something people are thinking about. It's not a concern of theirs, right? They've got all the other daily tasks. My experience so far has not been pushback like yours was. It's just, I don't have time to think about it. I don't understand it. And if you just persevere in those contacts and do it in a polite way, in a persistent way, those people that I'm talking about that I didn't hear back from are now all partners of mine. We're working together on making things happen. And it really starts with one building, an example you can show people so they can see for themselves. What's that warm color temperature look like? What's that lower light level look like? I like that, right? That's what it takes, not just talking about like I'm doing today. That's why my tagline in my email says, don't just talk, take action. That's been the most effective tool, is taking action, get a demonstration project set up somewhere, like the bridge maybe, for example, or like this building even. I don't know, Julie, I don't know what color temperature lights are, how bright they are, but find an example of good lighting that has good uniformity, low glare, warm color temperatures, the right amount of light, and then use that as an example.
On that note, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the town of Lafarge to make them kind of a demonstration project?
Sure. Jeff asked about the town of Lafarge and what we're doing there as far as a demo. I'll call it a lighting lab, in fact. We've been putting so many warm colored fixtures in and around Lafarge at 1800 Kelvin, 2200 Kelvin, including a section of street out in front of Organic Valley's headquarters building at the north end of Lafarge there, where it's a dead-end street. We changed out 5 poles to 2200 Kelvin. I've got cellular-based controls on each pole, so I can control from my phone lighting level individually if I want to, or grouped together. And so, in fact, we just submitted a grant about a week ago, and we're hoping to turn that into a research area where we can do roadway lighting research in front of that building, put up multiple fixtures and test different color temperatures against each other. But even if we don't get that grant, we're going to turn that into a location where we'll have workshops in Lafarge area, Kickapoo Valley Reserve, if any of you are familiar with that area, the large 9,000 acre nature preserve right outside of Lafarge. We changed all those lights to 1800 Kelvin a few months ago. And so there's opportunities there to bring people in and show them what's going to happen. So that's the near term. There'll be Natural Resource Foundation field trips this year, at least 2 this year, to that site. And we hope to greatly expand that in the future. Yeah.
So with Bayfield, if you look at Bayfield, where would we get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of cutting down, the light pollution? Where should we be looking at? It's gonna be hard to change up at every resident's home.
Right.
Where's the biggest bang for the buck?
So the question was, where's the biggest bang for the buck in
And by
Bayfield?
buck, I mean light pollution. You're cutting down light pollution, not necessarily dollars.
Dollars, right. So where can you get the greatest reduction in light pollution in Bayfield? And I came in last night after dark, literally went right to the bridge and then came back to the room to get warmed up. So I haven't spent any time outside yet looking at the city. I did drive by the library because Bill recommended I go by the library and saw the same fixtures, right? And obviously zero up light, that's fantastic. They're obviously warmer than 4,000 K, which is great. They didn't look overly bright to me. I didn't go out and measure them there, but whereas the bridge seemed like it was lit, overly lit. So where, I can't answer that question specifically, but one interesting fact I'll share with you is that even though I focus on municipal lighting and commercial lighting almost exclusively, and that's because of the fact that if I can persuade one public works director that I know what I'm talking about and we can make this pay for you, that'll affect all the streetlights in that community, right? However, studies that have been done at Mount Megantic up in Canada, Remy Boucher up there has done photographic studies taken from, I forget where the photographs come from, not satellite images a bit, well, they are satellites, but they're looking at photographs of the site. Pixel by pixel, he's looked at Sherbrooke in Canada. 70% of the light pollution coming out of Sherbrooke is residential. It's not from commercial, it's not from streetlights, it's residential because there's so many more residential properties, right? So if you're able to go person by person and say, turn your lights off at night or dim them down, that's where you'd have the biggest impact in terms of overall light pollution. Sorry.
What is the state of the market for retrofitting what we already have? Designers making light sources to fit into our existing instruments, and do they have accessories like shrouds to fit our existing instruments?
That's a great question. In fact, the lighting industry right now, just in the last year, has started to grapple with the fact that when we changed to LEDs, starting 15 years ago, but really accelerated about 10 years ago, these things are going to last, forever, right? Compared to a light bulb, they're going to last forever. All these great forms we can design, right? So as a result of that, trying to retrofit older LED fixtures is very limited options. Now, there are options available for new fixtures where you can add some additional shields. For many of them, we can add additional shields to get better cutoff angles. Not universally true. Otherwise, in fact, I just came across an organization, dark sky organization in New Jersey this past week, and their entire focus is retrofitting existing fixtures with shields. That's what they do. They go out and do mock-ups in cardboard, and then they come back to a metal shop and they make shields and they attach them to fixtures to have an impact like you're talking about. Where can we have the biggest impact in Bayfield? So that kind of effort.
Down to the grass.
What's that?
They don't want to replace a pole all the way down to the grass.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, I think there are opportunities to do it, but it's going to take an organized effort and some thoughtful planning to make it happen. It isn't going to be something you just go into a catalog and buy. Yeah.
So as someone who's a photographer and been out to, let's say, Devil's Island, 30 miles out in the lake, I've seen the impact of light pollution on the horizon. When you look at Bayfield, how far does the influence of Bayfield go in the night sky before it's somebody else's problem that we have to deal with? And as we look at trying to keep the sky around the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore dark, how big a circumference do we have to look at to make a measurable impact?
The National Park Service has done research on that, and the distance they've calculated is about 125 miles radius. So it's a big distance, right? It's a widespread area that you have to cover. And that's why my focus is not local in any way, shape, or form, other than to create demonstration sites to get these things adopted more broadly. Yeah.
Have you worked with marinas before?
I've not worked with marinas before. In fact, I'm speaking to a lake organization in Oconomowoc in March, and that's one of the, they want to talk about, shoreland lighting. And I don't have any personal experience with that, so I need to learn before then. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of us live out in the woods here, is my guess. And is there research on, or does these lighting changes helps with the impact on wildlife? And is there research on night vision in the process of wildlife running through security light, better night vision, or like that. It's esoteric, I know. But
Yeah, no, not esoteric at all. Actually, the question was, is there research on impacts on wildlife and wildlife vision and so forth? Yeah, if I didn't mention that, that's a lapse on my part. But that's actually my reason for being focused on this, is more so than humans, is the impacts of wildlife, and the research on that continues to just pile up. I literally get research things sent to me every day from my feeds on wildlife impacts, right? And so, yeah, everything from, well, even plants, right? Research now out of in New York State, looking at urban trees that are underneath light versus trees that are not underneath the light, and how it changes the phenology of those trees. So the leaves on this tree stay on the tree longer because it doesn't know the season has changed. And it's not as simple as saying, well, that's what's always going to happen, because this researcher has done studies, it isn't published yet, but she shared it the other day in a webinar I attended, where different species of trees respond differently to it. Every one of them was impacted. There was none of them that were not impacted, but they responded differently by species of tree. Moths, birds, mammals. More than 50% of all mammals are nocturnal, right? 80% of all migratory birds migrate at night, guided by stars and other things. But yeah, as we disrupt with artificial light, it has huge impacts on all these other species. And that's really the thing that, you can buy blackout shades for your house, right? We don't want to, but you can buy blackout shades for your house. If you're any other species, you don't have that option. So yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah.
A two-part question. Do you have any initial estimate of the city of Bayfield's streetlights? Now, the second for that question is, I think the chamber might have some responsibility for streetlights or some involvement with that. Are there any potential grant resources available for retrofitting or swapping that?
Okay, so the first part of the question was, what's my initial assessment of the street lighting in Bayfield? And the second part of the question is, maybe are there any grants available to help with that process and helping the chamber if they want to do something like that? Again, I'll just say I only spent a few minutes between the bridge and my hotel room last night. I did notice some street lights, I can't remember exactly where they were, that were not an acorn, but where they had a cap on top, but they had a glass shield around the sides, and so they were not zero up light by any stretch of the imagination. That's a big problem and should be changed, right? That'd be the first thing. And those were definitely bluer than, for example, the new lights at the library. So I'm guessing they're 4,000 Kelvin. That'd be what most streetlights are. In terms of grants, if they're municipal-owned lights, so if the city of Bayfield owns them, or if the city of Bayfield, they are, okay, that's great news, because Focus on Energy has a municipal roadway lighting incentive program that started in 2025 and has been re-upped for 2026, which was uncertain, but it is available for the rest of this year at least. Don't know if it'll be beyond that. Where if the fixtures are Design Lights Consortium approved, that's the first step, then they become eligible for these Focus on Energy incentives. And if you're in a rural zip code, which Bayfield is, there's a 60% bonus on that incentive. And now the incentive is based on how much light the fixture puts out. So from a dark sky perspective, ironically, the bigger the fixture you buy, the bigger your incentive is. Now the theory is, and it's true to a certain extent, the theory is that bigger fixtures cost more. And if you're replacing fixture X with a big fixture, the working assumption is, well, you must have a big fixture now, and you're going to be saving all this energy, which is what drives Focus on Energy incentives. But there's no check as far as whether you're actually taking out a 40-watt high-pressure sodium and putting in a 40,000 lumen LED. There's a check. But the point is, and I'll get there eventually, the point is there are incentives available, and as these warmer products get qualified, the other thing I'll mention, it may or may not be applicable here in your municipal streets, but there's a whole other program I didn't discuss, which is the DOT, the Wisconsin DOT qualified products list, both called QPLs, two different QPLs. Manufacturers want to be on that DOT list. Generally speaking, right now, it was only listed at 4,000 Kelvin. But one manufacturer has already, at my request, managed to get a 2200 Kelvin street light, just a standard Cobra head street light, on that DOT list. Because the DOT list requires manufacturers to put a 10-year warranty on their fixtures instead of 5, the DOT list requires them to add some features that you'd want as a municipality, like fusing. That's a great feature to have, but it costs more. They require that part of that. They require surge protection, which is another bonus. They're also very cost competitive because they want to get that contract. So the combination of being on that DOT list, in this case, it happens to be a Cooper fixture, right? I don't sell Cooper, I don't make any money, you can buy whoever you want to, but that fixture that's on there at $2,200K cost the municipality last year $67 after the rebate. It's got a 10-year warranty on it. It's got fusing, it's got surge protection, right? Those things. So if that fixture, I'm not saying it is, but if that fixture or others that I hope will get added onto the list this year would work for your application, the payback is, in some cases, months, depending on what you're taking out, and it has a 10-year warranty. Very long answer to a short question, sorry. Yeah.
What car dealerships? There's one down on Highway 2. It's the upline is, you think it's the Northern Lights when you see the cloud. And actually right next to them is the parking lot of a lot of sponsors of this event, which has equal upward motion.
Yeah.
And I know they're worried about people coming in, stretching their vehicles and stuff like that. And, is there anything we could do to show before and after, or how would you approach that?
So the question was, car dealerships in particular, how do you have a positive impact on getting them to reduce the uplight and the brightness of their lights? What's the way to approach that? There are, for example, Mont Megantic, the Sherbrooke area of Canada, there are parking lots up there of car dealers' lights are off at night, right? Which is amazing to think about. They are. There are some that will turn off most of the lights at the back of the lot and actually have the front lit. So if you want to use it as a merchandising thing, but they'll still reduce the light level at night. Yeah, I've not approached a car dealer yet, but I've had that question before. And that's a difficult one to answer because that's their retail store. Is that these warmer color temperature LEDs can have great color rendering for their products. You don't need to use the blue sources because, as I said many times, and thank you for reminding me of that, even if they kept the uplight, which we don't want them to do, right? Even if they kept the light level too high, which we don't want them to do, if they're willing to reduce the color temperature, you could still reduce sky brightness by 50%, right? The glare would still be there, all the rest. What was the second thing you asked me to mention? Sorry. Security. So I mentioned security cameras, and that's another area where I haven't had the time, quite honestly, to get in front of. With my partner and I we've applied to present at an event on campus security in April, I think it is. We need to get in front of security people and explain to them that you can use better lighting and actually have better security camera performance. So from the standpoint of people scratching their cars, right? It seems unlikely that they're going to do anything other than go after them after they have. If they think it's discouraging people from do that, maybe not. I don't really think it is. And does it need to be that bright to discourage somebody? But if that's your argument, okay. But if the goal is to be able to catch them after the fact, and you're worried about being able to see them on a camera, on a tape, and go look at it later, security cameras can do that at very low light levels. In fact, there are cameras that don't need any light whatsoever, but they won't get good color necessarily, but they'll get good images with no light whatsoever. We can get really good color images of people at very low light levels now. So maybe that's part of it. Yeah.
What's your knowledge about tower lighting and how to improve it, especially around the park?
Question was my knowledge of tower lighting and how to improve it. You're talking about communication towers, that kind of thing? I don't have any personal knowledge of that at all. I don't know what the FAA requirements are for brightness. I know that the tower, I shouldn't say I know, I believe the tower lighting requirements are driven by FAA requirements for aircraft obstruction, but I really don't have any first-hand knowledge of that, unfortunately. Yeah.
A follow-up with a question about the street light. I made enough of a pet for myself in DCW down here about the glare from the street lights. If I need to put a shield on our side just across the street here, cut the glare down.
So to share for the taping, the comment was, that you can go to the public works director and ask for shields on streetlights, and you may get them, right? One question I asked the group is, do we know when these streetlights were put in? How old are they? 2015. That's great. That's wonderful news. So they're nearing end of life, actually, a 10-year LED. That's great news. The reason that's great news is because of the fact that you have an opportunity now if you take a proactive approach, right, to change into something better. So the city of Viroqua, I've worked with a lot, the city of Viroqua, and they have what I call an acorn fixture for their streetlights. They have, I think, 200 of these decorative acorn lights with no shield on top. We put up mock-ups of 4 different fixtures on one of the side streets. The city engineer was really engaging in this effort, and she proactively approached, for example, the historical commission and showed them the alternatives and said, what do you think of this? And they signed on. There's another committee in the state, or the city, I don't know what the name was. She went to them and said, what do you think of these fixtures? They signed on. She did a public survey, right? Overwhelmingly, people like, yeah, I like that one better, right? As a result, because those fixtures too are about 10 years old, as a result, for their new street project, they're using a zero uplight 2200 Kelvin street light. And because it's roadway lighting, and of the new street project, we gave all those photometric files, the files that define how that light is distributed and all the rest, to the roadway lighting engineer doing that project. He did the calculations. And I don't want to get technical, but I will anyway. So there's something in roadway lighting called veiling luminance. And what that means is when a light hits the ground on the street in front of you, and then bounces off the ground and shines into your eyes at that fixed height above grade where you're driving, how much does that obstruct your view of the street? With the zero uplight fixture at 2200 Kelvin, that criteria went improved by 35%. Less veiling luminance, right? We saved energy, the cutoff angles, so we aren't lighting way up under the sides of the buildings. It's a win all the way around. So you could have the same kind of opportunity here if those fixtures are that age, to, again, be proactive about it, combined with these incentives that are available, combined with fixtures that could be qualified, right? And I would actually love to have an opportunity for a case study, if you had a fixture that you were interested in looking at, to get that fixture listed so that it would qualify for the incentives, right? Especially a decorative fixture. Yeah.
You said something about one business choosing to use camera lighting on it instead of LEDs, right? And so it's good that they did something, but couldn't you do both?
Can you do? Well, they are LEDs. No, they're amber LEDs. You can buy. In fact, if you go to most manufacturers and look at their cut sheets, it'll be easier for you to find a direct emission amber LED as an option on their cut sheets than 2200K or 1800K today. I'm working really, really hard on changing that, right? But DE Amber is available because of turtles in Florida. That's why it's available. So Jeff's giving me the sign here, so go ahead, Jeff.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, thanks, Scott. Let's give him a hand, everybody. That's a lot of information, but I think it's really important because it allows us to take that next step from wishing and being inspired to actually doing. One of the difficulties is assimilating all this information in one place. Scott may give us some examples of where we can go and look, but I know I met Scott through my work with Dark Skies Wisconsin, and one of the things that Scott is helping us do is to gather this kind of information, get it up on their website. So that's going to be one place. Friends of the Apostle Islands is going to look at specific issues, as Jim mentioned here about the tower lighting and how it affects the apostles. We're going to look at that and get that up on our website. And maybe Scott can give us more information to go back and review this. Where are the best places on the internet for us to go back to?
Yeah. So we can let everybody go who wants to escape, but anybody who wants to stick around, I can answer more questions for you. So feel free just to ditch me if you want anytime. Yeah.
But I've been talking to my students for years about lighting and security, most specifically. How do we change human psychology?
Wow.
Because thinking that the more light there is, the safer we are. I mean, that seems to be the biggest thing. And that slide you used with the man and the gate and some similar to that were ones I showed.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a big deal to get humans to think differently.
Yeah, so the question was, how do we get humans to think differently? Because that concerns about security and safety seems to be what drives so much of outdoor lighting. And the RP43 committee, the IES Committee on Outdoor Lighting, has really thought about that a lot. And Nancy Clanton is really a leader in lighting design and lighting research. She's just recently retired from a firm she founded in Colorado, but Clanton Associates. But Nancy Clanton talks about reassurance. That's the word she prefers to use rather than safety or anything else. She uses reassurance. And, she said herself, and I would agree, actually, we want to feel reassured when we're outside at night that we're safe, right? That's what we're looking for. And so their focus has really been on how can you give people that sense of assurance in the lowest possible lighting level way, right? And so Nancy's focus now is really on controls. And I will say, my wife and I, when we happened to be in Europe when I found this study on France. So we changed our travel plans to go to the parts of France that had this plan in effect. And very ironically, we were late getting to an Airbnb one night. We walked from the bus stop 25 minutes to our Airbnb. We were late getting there, couldn't get in. While we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, we were standing outside the place and all the streetlights went off at midnight. And it went dark. And you could immediately see stars. Our eyes didn't even need to adjust. It just immediately could see black sky and stars. It was amazing. But we still needed to have a place to sleep that night, and it wasn't going to be there, so we had to find a place to sleep. And we had to figure out how we're going to get through the city now in blackness. We both forgot we had headlamps on. Having had that experience, and she'll disagree with me, having had that experience, I think in many cases the best approach is to dim to a minimum level public lighting. So you still have that sense of assurance. You can still find the curb, right? Yeah, I don't know how we change that. That's a great question. If you could solve that problem, that'd be awesome. Yeah.
What about motion detector?
The suggestion was using motion detector lighting. And I'll tell you, the only pushback I hear on that, and I've experienced it installing motion detectors, and it's getting better, right, is how well they operate. Do they detect you at the distance you need to be detected? Do they constantly come on and off? When I stay at my mom's house up in Minnesota, her neighbor has an outdoor, very blue light, doesn't matter, on a motion detector. And that light, when it's on, shines right at the bedroom window that I use, even though there's a cellular shade there. And at night, it's going on and off randomly, right? The state officials I've talked to about incorporating more motion sensing into the state standards have concerns about the failure rate of those, right? How robust are they in terms of how durable are they? But because they're required by the energy code, in fact, the new energy code in Wisconsin, the dimming level I told you about, most lighting designers I know are applying another section of that code that's part of the international code, which is that during business hours, there are motion sensors on parking lot lights so that in unused parts of parking lots, usually you group a few fixtures together, right? You don't do one by one. Those parking lot lights are also off or dimmed. And so as a car drives into that area or a pedestrian walks in, they come up to broad brightness or turn on. So that's a great suggestion. I think the biggest impediment to that is the reality of making sure they work a little better and then getting past the folks that think, well, I don't want to put them in because they're going to fail and they're another maintenance item. That's the biggest problem. But otherwise, that's a great solution, right? Motion sensors.
So Scott will hang around for coffee and dinners. Is there any of that left? And thank you very much for coming in. And thank you, Julie, and Honest Dog Books. I want to mention the event tonight, which is at the St. James Social. The chance to look at the artwork that is up on display at the Island Gateway Gallery and Gathering. And there are some of these around. This will list all the events through Thursday. So thank you all for coming. Let's dim this place one light bulb at a time.